Picture this. It's the worst storm in decades, rain hammering down like bullets on a small trailer home. Inside, a broke single father counts his last $20 bill, while his 8-year-old daughter sleeps on a worn-out couch, using his jacket as a blanket. Then comes a desperate knock at the door. Standing there, soaked to the bone, is a mysterious pregnant woman with tears streaming down her face, begging for shelter. What this struggling father doesn't know is that this one act of kindness will change everything. Because the woman shivering on his doorstep isn't just any stranger. She's the missing heiress to a billion-dollar empire, and her story will turn their... The thunderstorm that swept through the small town of Millbrook that October night was unlike anything the residents had seen in years. Michael Thompson, a 32-year-old construction worker, sat at his rickety kitchen table staring at the final notice from the electric company. His calloused hands trembled slightly as he counted the crumpled bills in his wallet. $23.47. That was all that stood between him and his 8-year-old daughter Emma, being thrown into complete darkness. Emma slept peacefully on their threadbare couch, her small frame curled up under Michael's old work jacket. The trailer they called home leaked in 3 different spots, and Michael had strategically placed buckets to catch the drips. The rhythmic pinging of water hitting metal created an almost hypnotic soundtrack to his worries. He'd lost his job at the construction site 2 weeks ago, when the project was unexpectedly canceled. And despite applying everywhere, no one was hiring. The storm outside grew more violent with each passing hour. Wind howled through the gaps in their trailer's walls, and the lights flickered ominously. Michael knew that if the power went out, they had no backup plan. No generator, no extra blankets that weren't already damp from the leaks, and certainly no money for a hotel room. He thought about his late wife, Sarah, who had passed away 3 years ago from cancer. She would have known what to do. She always did. Sarah had been the optimist, the one who could find silver linings in the darkest clouds. Michael tried to channel her strength, but tonight hope felt as distant as the stars hidden behind the storm clouds. The desperate knocking at his door came just after midnight. Through the rain and wind, Michael could barely make out the sound at first. When it came again, more urgent and frantic, he peered through the peephole. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. A young woman, no more than 24 years old, stood shivering in the downpour. She was heavily pregnant, probably 7 or 8 months along, and despite her expensive-looking clothes that were now soaked and muddy, there was something refined about her appearance. Her long auburn hair was plastered to her face, and even through the distorted view of the peephole, Michael could see the desperation in her green eyes. Without hesitation, Michael opened the door. The woman nearly collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. She was trembling violently, whether from cold, fear, or both, he couldn't tell. Her designer shoes were caked with mud, and her silk blouse clung to her shivering form. This wasn't someone from their neighborhood. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege. Yet here she was, more vulnerable than anyone he'd ever seen. Michael quickly ushered her inside, grabbing a towel from their small bathroom. The woman's teeth chattered so violently she could barely speak. When she finally managed to whisper her name, Isabella, her voice carried an accent that suggested education and refinement. She looked around their humble trailer with no judgment, only gratitude that someone had opened their door to a stranger in the storm. As Michael helped her to the couch, carefully moving Emma to his own bed, he noticed Isabella's hands. Despite being young, they showed no signs of manual labor, and a faint tan line on her ring finger suggested she'd recently removed an expensive wedding band. Her purse, though waterlogged, was clearly designer. Yet when she reached for it with shaking hands, it appeared to be completely empty except for a few wet tissues. Image prompt. First half. Michael Thompson, 32 years old. Worried expression, tired construction worker, sitting at a small kitchen table in a dimly lit trailer, counting crumpled dollar bills while his 8-year-old daughter Emma, blonde hair, innocent face, sleeps on a worn couch in the background with buckets catching rainwater drips. Isabella spent the next 3 days recovering in the Thompson trailer, and with each passing day, more questions arose about her mysterious past. She was clearly well educated, speaking with the kind of refined vocabulary that came from expensive private schools and university education. Yet she claimed to have nowhere to go and no one to call. Michael noticed the small details that didn't add up. Isabella's fingernails, though now chipped and broken, showed signs of recent professional manicures. Her skin, despite being pale from stress and exhaustion, had the kind of glow that came from expensive skincare routines and regular spa treatments. Most telling of all was the way she carried herself, even in her vulnerable state. There was an inherent grace and poise that suggested she was accustomed to being treated with deference and respect. Emma, innocent in the way only children can be, had immediately taken to Isabella. She shared her favorite books with the pregnant woman, chattering about school and her dreams of becoming a veterinarian someday. Isabella listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and encouraging Emma's ambitions in a way that suggested she understood the importance of education and following one's dreams. During quiet moments, Michael would catch Isabella staring out the small trailer window with a mixture of sadness and longing. Her hand would unconsciously move to her swollen belly, and tears would gather in her eyes. When he asked if she wanted to talk about the father of her baby, Isabella would simply shake her head and change the subject. The expensive smartphone that Isabella had been clutching when she arrived remained constantly turned off. She claimed the battery was dead, but Michael had offered to let her use his charger multiple times, and she always politely declined. It was clear that she was hiding from someone or something, and the fear in her eyes suggested that whatever she was running from was serious. On the fourth morning, Isabella woke up in excruciating pain. Her contractions had started during the night, and it was clear that her baby was coming early. Michael's old pickup truck barely started in the cold October air, but somehow they managed to get to Millbrook Community Hospital, just as Isabella's labor intensified. In the hospital waiting room, Michael paced nervously while Emma sat quietly, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. They had no legal right to be there. They weren't family, barely even friends. Yet Isabella had gripped Michael's hand with desperate strength and begged him not to leave her alone. The medical staff, seeing no other emergency contacts, reluctantly allowed them to stay. During the long hours of labor, Isabella's defenses finally began to crumble. Between contractions, she whispered fragments of her story to Michael. She spoke of a controlling father who had tried to force her into an arranged marriage with a business partner. She mentioned betrayal by someone she had trusted completely, and a desperate escape that had led her to their door. Most shocking of all, Isabella revealed that her last name wasn't the simple Smith she had initially given them. Through tears and pain, she whispered that she was Isabella Montgomery, the missing heiress to Montgomery Industries, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in America. Her father, Richard Montgomery, had been searching for her for months, but Isabella was convinced that returning home would mean losing her freedom forever. When baby Grace was finally born, a beautiful, healthy girl with her mother's auburn hair and bright, curious eyes, Isabella looked at Michael with profound gratitude. This stranger, this kind-hearted man who had nothing to give but had given everything, had been more supportive during the birth of her daughter than anyone from her privileged life had ever been. In that moment, something shifted between them, a bond that went beyond circumstance and touched something deeper. The weeks following Grace's birth transformed the Thompson household in ways Michael never could have imagined. Isabella, despite her physical exhaustion and emotional turmoil, threw herself into caring for not just her newborn daughter, but also into creating a sense of family that had been missing from their trailer since Sarah's death. She cooked elaborate meals using ingredients she somehow managed to stretch from their meager grocery budget, turning simple pasta and vegetables into dishes that tasted like they came from expensive restaurants. Isabella taught Emma proper table manners, not in a condescending way, but with gentle guidance that made the little girl feel sophisticated and grown up. Most remarkably, Isabella seemed to genuinely love their simple life. She found joy in hanging laundry on the line behind their trailer, in watching Emma play in the small yard, in the quiet evenings when they would all sit together watching old movies on their tiny television. For someone who had grown up with servants and luxury, she adapted to their humble circumstances with remarkable grace. Michael found himself falling for Isabella in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. She was everything Sarah hadn't been, worldly, educated from a completely different social class. Yet she shared Sarah's most important quality, the ability to make their small family feel complete. Isabella would catch him staring at her sometimes, and the warmth in her smile suggested that his feelings might not be entirely one-sided. The growing attraction between them was complicated by their circumstances. Michael was acutely aware of the vast difference in their backgrounds. He was a high school graduate who worked with his hands, while Isabella casually referenced things like summer homes in the Hamptons and boarding schools in Switzerland. Yet when she looked at him holding baby Grace, or when she watched him patiently help Emma with her homework, something in her eyes suggested that she saw him as more than just the kind stranger who had taken her in. One evening in November, as the first snow began to fall, Isabella made a confession that changed everything. She told Michael that she had been living a lie, not about her identity, but about her feelings. She admitted that somewhere between the storm that brought her to his door and the moment he held her hand during Grace's birth, she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with him. Isabella revealed that in her world of arranged marriages and business partnerships, she had never experienced genuine love before. Every man she had dated had been interested in her father's money and connections. Michael was the first person who had ever seen her simply as a woman in need, who had offered kindness without expecting anything in return. Through tears, Isabella confessed that she was torn between two impossible choices. She could return to her father's world, claim her inheritance, and provide Michael and Emma with financial security beyond their wildest dreams. But doing so would mean accepting the controlling, restrictive life her father had planned for her, and likely losing the authentic love she had found in their trailer. Alternatively, she could stay and build a life with Michael and Emma, but that would mean living in poverty, struggling to provide for Grace, and potentially putting them all at risk when her father's private investigators eventually tracked her down. Richard Montgomery was not a man who accepted defiance lightly, and Isabella knew that her disappearance had already caused him to unleash every resource at his disposal to find her. Michael listened to her confession with a mixture of overwhelming joy and heartbreaking sadness. He realized that he too had fallen in love, not with the mysterious woman who had appeared at his door, but with Isabella, the person. The woman who sang lullabies to Grace in the middle of the night, who helped Emma with her math homework with infinite patience, who made their trailer feel like a real home for the first time since Sarah's death. But Michael also understood the impossible position Isabella was in. He had been poor his entire life, and he knew the weight of financial stress, the constant worry about providing for those you love. Could he really ask Isabella to choose love over security, especially when baby Grace deserved every opportunity that Isabella's inheritance could provide? The knock that came on a cold December morning was nothing like the desperate tapping Isabella had made 2 months earlier. This was authoritative, demanding, and accompanied by the sound of expensive car doors slamming shut. Through the trailer's small window, Michael could see 3 black SUVs parked outside, and men in dark suits speaking into earpieces. Isabella's face went white with terror as she recognized the voice calling her name from outside. Richard Montgomery had found them, and he had brought what appeared to be a small army with him. At 58 years old, Richard Montgomery was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His suit cost more than Michael made in 6 months, and his cold blue eyes radiated the kind of power that came from controlling billion-dollar business empires. When Isabella finally opened the door, the contrast between father and daughter was stark. Richard's disgust was barely concealed as he took in the modest trailer, the second-hand furniture, and most of all, Michael, the blue-collar worker who had dared to harbor his runaway daughter. His bodyguards flanked him, making the small trailer feel even more cramped and inadequate. Richard's anger was ice-cold and calculated. He had spent months and countless resources tracking down Isabella, and he was not leaving without her. He spoke to Michael with barely contained contempt, making it clear that he viewed him as nothing more than an opportunistic gold digger who had taken advantage of his pregnant daughter's vulnerability. The Accusations Richard hurled at Michael were devastating and personal. He suggested that Michael had deliberately isolated Isabella from her family, that he had manipulated a frightened pregnant woman for his own gain, and that his motives were entirely mercenary. Each word was designed to wound, to make Michael question his own actions and feelings. But Richard Montgomery had underestimated both his daughter and the man she had chosen to love. Isabella, holding baby Grace protectively in her arms, stood up to her father with a strength and dignity that surprised everyone in the room. She defended Michael with passionate intensity, making it clear that he had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. Isabella revealed to her father the truth about why she had run away, not just from the arranged marriage he had planned, but from a lifetime of being treated as a business asset rather than a human being. She told him about the love she had found in the trailer, about the family she had built with Michael and Emma, and about her determination to raise Grace in an environment where she would be valued for who she was, not what she could provide. The confrontation reached its climax when Richard made Michael an offer that was both generous and insulting. He would pay Michael $10 million to disappear from Isabella's life permanently. Richard believed, with the cynicism of a man who had spent his life in boardrooms and business deals, that everyone had a price. He was certain that a poor construction worker would jump at the chance for financial security. Michael's response shocked everyone, including Isabella. Without hesitation, he refused the money and told Richard that Isabella was free to make her own choices. He wouldn't take a bribe to leave, but he also wouldn't force Isabella to choose between her inheritance and their relationship. If she decided to return to her father's world, Michael would respect her decision and wish her well. The moment stretched endlessly, as Isabella looked between her father's expectant face and Michael's quiet dignity. Richard was offering her everything she had grown up with: security, luxury, social status, and the resources to give Grace the best of everything. Michael was offering her nothing but love, and the uncertain future of a working-class family trying to make ends meet. Emma, who had been quietly watching from the corner, suddenly spoke up with the innocent wisdom that only children possess. She looked at Isabella and simply said that she hoped Isabella and Grace wouldn't leave, because they had made their trailer feel like a real family again. It was the purest, most honest expression of love in the room, and it cut through all the adult complications and calculations. The silence that followed Emma's innocent words was deafening. In that moment, Isabella realized that the choice before her wasn't really between wealth and poverty, or even between her father's approval and Michael's love. It was between living authentically as herself or returning to a gilded cage where she would always be someone else's property. Isabella's decision came not as a dramatic declaration, but as a quiet, firm statement that resonated with absolute certainty. She told her father that she was staying with Michael, that she would rather raise Grace in a trailer filled with love than in a mansion filled with expectations and conditions. Her voice never wavered, even as tears streamed down her face. Richard Montgomery's reaction was swift and brutal. He disowned Isabella on the spot, cutting her off completely from the family fortune, and declaring that she was no longer his daughter. The words were designed to hurt, to make her reconsider by showing her exactly what she would be giving up. But Isabella had already counted the cost, and she had decided that love was worth more than money. As Richard and his entourage prepared to leave, he made one final, devastating prediction. He told Isabella that she would regret her choice, that poverty would destroy her idealistic notions of love, and that she would eventually come crawling back to him when reality set in. His parting words were that she had 1 year to change her mind, after which his offer would be permanently withdrawn. The trailer felt strangely empty after the Montgomery convoy disappeared down the road. Isabella sat on the couch, holding Grace and processing what had just happened. She had just given up billions of dollars, and she felt free. For the first time in her life, she had made a choice based entirely on what she wanted, not what others expected from her. What happened next would become family legend in the Thompson household. Michael, overwhelmed by Isabella's sacrifice and love, got down on one knee in their tiny living room and proposed with a simple promise that he would spend every day of his life making sure she never regretted choosing love over luxury. Isabella's yes was immediate and joyful. They were married 6 weeks later, in a small ceremony at Millbrook Community Church, with Emma as the flower girl and baby Grace as the world's youngest wedding guest. Isabella wore a simple white dress from a local department store, and it was the most beautiful she had ever felt in her life. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were filled with a richness that had nothing to do with money. Michael found steady work with a construction company that valued his skills and work ethic. Isabella used her business education to help him eventually start his own contracting business, and her natural intelligence and refined communication skills helped them build relationships with clients who appreciated quality work and honest dealing. Emma flourished with Isabella as her stepmother, someone who encouraged her dreams while teaching her that true worth came from character, not circumstances. Grace grew up surrounded by love, completely unaware that she had given up $1 billion inheritance before she could even walk. The most beautiful part of their story came 5 years later, when Emma graduated as valedictorian of her high school class, as Isabella and Michael watched their daughter, because that's what Emma had become, deliver a speech about how love and perseverance could overcome any obstacle. They realized that they had created something far more valuable than Richard Montgomery's empire. They had built a family based on choice rather than obligation, on love rather than expectation, and on the radical belief that sometimes the richest life is the one where you choose to give everything up for the people who matter most.